the number one that is on the page is black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. We're sitting in duality of this right or wrong or good or bad, when if we can kind of bring all that together into oneness and unity, all of that duality, all that black and white thinking, all the all or nothing thinking, all of that, we feel such a calm and peace inside being in the Christian church. It's like they may say that it's like you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be these things, but then at the same time you're judged by everybody you're around.
You mentioned earlier, one of the things that started happening for you as you were a Christian counselor was basically, it sounded like the experience from your clients and like hearing their experiences as well. I'm sure dealing with your own, like within the church, was a big part of what led you to like leave the church. And I was wondering if, I know you obviously have to respect confidentiality and such, but like what kind of things were you seeing that made you start questioning or saying, hey, maybe there's something else going on here that's not so great, or that I need to separate myself from this to find something different or better? Like what were you seeing or hearing, or what was that like for you?
Well, so in cognitive behavioral therapy, okay, CBT, that's like one of the gold standards for counseling. If you ever go to counseling, they're probably going to talk about CBT. In CBT, they have this list of the top 10 cognitive distortions. Okay? Cognitive distortions meaning problematic thinking patterns. Okay? And so this was something I was trained in, and I was practicing myself to step out of those. But the number one that is on the page is black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. And again, what is that? That is what we were talking about with the devil card. It's, we're sitting in duality, of this right or wrong or good or bad, when if we can kind of bring all that together into oneness and unity, all of that duality, all that black and white thinking, all the all or nothing thinking, all of that, we feel such a calm and peace inside. And that's what I was helping people with over and over and over in this experience of perfectionism, right? Because it's kind of like that is the root as well. It ties right into black and white thinking, and it's like, I have to either be perfect or I'm a failure. And so, but we know we can't be perfect up here, but there's a disconnect. I feel like I still should be. And so we've got this bar so high that we will never reach, and so we live our entire lives feeling like we're less than, we're not enough, right? And that not enoughness was what I was seeing over and over and over and over. And I was just like, this, number one, it's not healthy for these people. They're experiencing a lot of disease and just, it was miserable, right? And so that was the very thing that it was just like I was coming to this awareness of just seeing this over and over, and then how in the church this was in some ways it's so hard, because unless you've experienced it yourself being in the Christian church, it's like they may say that it's like you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be these things, but then at the same time you're judged for it by everybody you're around. If you've got an issue, you tend to be just judged, like, why haven't you figured this out yet? And so it's an amazing place for community, but for healing, I didn't find that was the greatest place for healing.
Yeah. Well, it's such an interesting dichotomy. And what came up for me as you were talking about it was when, I was in the church, it was a lot of like, okay, yeah, like everybody like sins and you make mistakes and you do these things and you ask for forgiveness, and like you're never going to be perfect, you're always going to be imperfect, but at the same time, to your point, it's like you're meant to be striving for perfection in some way, right? And then it becomes this thing of like, well, all you have to do is like, ask God to forgive you and you're saved and like you're good, but like, if you keep doing the thing, then maybe you're not really asking for repentance, so you're not actually doing the thing right. And so it becomes this like endless game of like suffering, where you're like kind of walking on this like spiritual eggshells in a sense of like, am I doing the right thing? Have I repented enough times? Have I actually made the change, or do I just have to like make sure I ask for forgiveness one last time right before I die, before I can fuck up again? Like, what if I forget?
Exactly.
Right? There's like so much like existential dread that starts going on in the brain.
And think about
that
how much fear that is right
the
there. Just
time,
right.
yeah.
Like it's this constant fear that I'm not enough and feeling.
Hmm.
So anyway, to your point, but yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess what I'm wondering, when as you're seeing this like in clients, and I'm sure like on some level you're seeing that maybe reflected in your own psyche with some of these other pieces, like how did that start to like shift your, I don't know, your perspective around God or the church or like those kinds of things at that time? Because it obviously led you to leaving, and you said you like still have your own spirituality, and you've never really, it didn't lead you to like, oh, okay, there's just like no God, this is all just like bullshit or quackery. So like how did that shift things for you, and like what started to change in that moment?
Yeah. So the way that I'm going to answer this might seem roundabout, but it's
Yeah.
all going to tie together. Okay. Remember how I talked about those three phases of healing your body?
Hmm.
Okay. To me, those three phases also represent our human evolution, our individual human evolution too, along with our collective. So it's like we start out with the emotional brain, right? And it's all based on safety and survival. There's a lot of fear, right? Our entire emotional system in the amygdala is in that part of the brain, right? And as we are able to manage our emotional brain, it allows us to connect to the Wi-Fi for our thinking brain, right? And if we're not thinking clearly, that's probably the first thing we should do is, am I fully dealing with and releasing my emotions so that I can calm down my amygdala and think more clearly? So, step one is getting out of fear. Step two is getting into the mind. Now, this is where I see uh, it's kind of like let's parallel this back to spirituality and religion for a second. You know, this was all hedonistic when we were in the emotional brain, and that was kind of that's where we started, right? It was kind of hedonism, and then we go into religion. That's all about the mind. It's understanding. It's logic. It's there's got to be this right? Okay. To me, that's step two. That's phase two. It's part of the process. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad about it. It's just everyone is going to eventually work through from the emotional brain into the thinking brain, just like we will in some ways in religion. And then we're working to drop down into the intuitive divine heart. To me, this is again where you're going to find spirituality. So we're going from religion to experience, but understanding, quote unquote, God, to experiencing God in the body. That's spirituality.